My name is Sarah Mitchell, and for as long as I can remember, my older sister Anna was the center of my world. She was 5 years older than me, but that never stopped her from treating me like an equal. When we were little girls, she used to braid my hair before school, slip me candy under the dinner table, and whisper secrets to me long after our parents had gone to sleep. Anna was my role model, my protector, and my best friend all rolled into one. The day she died was the day my world broke in half. It was late autumn, the air sharp with cold, when the phone rang. I was 15, sitting at the kitchen table with my homework spread out in front of me. My mother answered, her voice casual at first, then tightening, then breaking. I'll never forget the way her body collapsed against the wall, the receiver dangling from her hand. My father snatched it up, his jaw tightening as he listened. When he hung up, he didn't look at me right away. His eyes were hollow, his face ashen. "Anna's been in an accident," he said flatly. I didn't understand at first. Accident? What kind of accident? Was she hurt? Could we go see her? But the silence that followed told me everything. Anna was gone. The official story was simple. She had been driving home late from a friend's house, took a sharp curve too fast, and lost control of her car. It struck a guardrail and flipped. She died instantly, they said, which was meant to be a mercy. But there was no mercy in the way my heart shattered that night. Her funeral was a blur of black suits, cold November rain, and people I barely recognized offering condolences that sounded rehearsed. I remember staring at her coffin, willing it to open, willing her to step out and tell us it was all a mistake. But she never did. Everyone called it a tragedy. A senseless, random accident. My parents repeated that phrase so many times it began to sound like a mantra. It was an accident. There was nothing anyone could have done. My father buried himself in work, as if the office could shield him from grief. My mother floated through the house like a ghost, clinging to rituals just to keep herself standing. And me? I tried to survive. For years, I carried the belief that Anna's death was fate, that she had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and life had cruelly stolen her away. I clung to the stories people told about her, the kind, bright girl who lit up every room, who had so much ahead of her. I built her into an angel in my mind, because it was easier than facing the truth. She was gone, and I had to go on without her. But even then, even in the thick fog of grief, there were things that didn't sit right. Small things. The police report said she had been alone, yet a witness claimed they saw another car on the road that night, one that never stopped. The coroner listed her time of death at 11:30 p.m., but I remembered hearing her voice on the answering machine just 15 minutes earlier, saying she was on her way home. And then there was the car itself, crumpled beyond recognition, but strangely the driver's side door had been forced open from the outside, as if someone else had been there first. At the time, I pushed these doubts away. I was just a teenager drowning in loss, desperate to believe the adults who told me it was an accident. Nothing more. But years later, when I stumbled across her hidden diary, I would learn that those doubts were not only real, they were only the beginning. In the months after Anna's death, our house became a mausoleum. It wasn't just the silence that haunted me, it was the weight of absence, the way her laughter no longer echoed through the halls, the way her bedroom door stayed shut as if opening it would unleash unbearable pain. Every corner of the house held her memory, her shoes still by the door, her perfume lingering in the air, her handwriting on sticky notes left on the refrigerator. My parents each grieved in their own way, and those ways were like two parallel tracks that never touched. My mother clung to Anna's belongings with ferocity, as if throwing away even the smallest scrap of paper would erase her from existence. She would fold and refold Anna's sweaters, polish her trophies from school, and sit in her room late at night with the lamp on, staring at old photos. Sometimes when I passed by her door, I could hear her whispering softly, as if Anna might answer back. My father, on the other hand, became a stranger to me. He buried himself in work, leaving early in the morning and coming home long after midnight. When he was home, he rarely spoke. If I tried to bring up Anna, he would cut me off, his voice sharp. "We've been over this, Sarah. It was an accident. Talking about it won't bring her back." His way of surviving was denial, shutting out everything that hurt. But the more he tried to close the door on grief, the more it wedged itself into every space between us. I was 15, caught between their two versions of grief, and I didn't know how to survive mine. At school, people avoided me. Teachers offered sympathy, but quickly shifted the subject. Friends didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. I felt like I carried a shadow everywhere I went, and no one wanted to stand too close. The hardest part was the guilt. I kept thinking about the last conversation I had with Anna. She had promised to take me shopping that weekend, just the two of us. "We'll make a whole day of it," she said with that bright smile of hers. "Don't let Mom steal you away." We laughed, but I never got that day. I kept replaying it in my mind, wondering if I should have told her to be careful that night, if I should have called her one more time, begged her to stay home. Survivor's guilt is cruel. It convinces you that somehow you could have changed the outcome if only you'd done one thing differently. Years passed, but the wound never healed. On anniversaries, my mother would light a candle in front of Anna's photograph, her hands trembling. My father would disappear into the garage or his office, anything to avoid the reminder. And me, I kept my pain folded inside, tucked between the pages of textbooks, hidden behind fake smiles at school dances. I pretended to move on, but inside, I was still that 15-year-old girl, frozen in the moment the phone rang. There were times, late at night, when I would dream of her. In the dreams, she wasn't dead. She was standing at the edge of my bed, her hair falling across her face, her voice urgent. Sometimes she would say my name, other times she would whisper words I couldn't quite make out. I'd wake up in tears, my chest tight, convinced that Anna was trying to tell me something. But in the daylight, I always brushed it aside as the tricks of a grieving mind. Still, there was one thing that gnawed at me, year after year, the unanswered questions. Why did the accident feel so wrong? Why did small details never add up? Why did no one, not even the police, dig deeper? I kept those questions locked away, buried under years of silence. I wanted to believe the story my parents repeated, that it was fate, nothing more. But deep down, some part of me knew better. And when I finally stumbled upon Anna's hidden diary years later, all those old doubts would explode into something much darker. It had been almost 10 years since Anna's death when I found the diary. By then, I was 24, out of college, and trying desperately to build a normal life. I had moved into a small apartment in the city, far enough from my parents' house that I could breathe, but close enough that the weight of the past still hung over me. I told myself I was moving forward, new job, new friends, even a boyfriend who didn't know the full story of my sister. But no matter how hard I tried, Anna's absence followed me like a shadow. When my mother passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack, I was the one tasked with cleaning out the family home. My father refused. He said he couldn't bear to walk through the rooms filled with memories, so the responsibility fell to me. Alone, I returned to the house I had once called home, armed with cardboard boxes and garbage bags. It was strange how unchanged everything was. The furniture still sat in the same places, the walls still decorated with old family photos. Even Anna's room had been preserved like a shrine. The sight of it made my stomach knot. I pushed the door open slowly, the faint smell of her perfume still lingering after all those years. Her desk was cluttered with notebooks, her bookshelf lined with the same dog-eared novels she loved as a teenager. I started sorting through her things, telling myself it was just part of the process. Old clothes for donation, books to keep, trinkets for storage. And then, tucked beneath a stack of school essays in the bottom drawer of her desk, I saw it. A small leather-bound book, the cover worn smooth, the edges frayed. I pulled it out with trembling hands. On the first page, in Anna's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Private. Do not read." For a long moment, I just stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. It felt wrong, intrusive to open it. She hadn't meant for anyone to see it, not me, not our parents, no one. but something deep inside urged me on. Maybe it was the years of unanswered questions, the fragments of doubt that had never left me. Maybe it was the part of me that still heard her whisper in my dreams. I opened the diary. The first entries were exactly what you'd expect from a teenage girl. Notes about school, friends, crushes, the usual day-to-day thoughts of someone still figuring out who they were. I smiled sadly as I read her words, hearing her voice again in the lines of ink. But then, a few pages in, the tone shifted. There were small mentions of someone she referred to only as H sentences like, H was watching me again today. Or, I wish I could tell Sarah, but I don't want to scare her. My stomach tightened. Who was H? A boy? A teacher? A neighbor? At first, I thought it might have been nothing more than a teenage crush or paranoia. But as I kept reading, the entries grew darker. I think H followed me home tonight. I kept hearing footsteps. Maybe it's in my head, but I don't think so. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Please let someone find this. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The words leapt off the page, searing themselves into my mind. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. It was the line I had been waiting for all my life, though I hadn't known it. The line that confirmed what I had always feared deep down. Anna hadn't died by chance. She had been afraid. She had been followed. She had known something was coming. My hands shook as I turned the pages faster, desperate to see what else she had written. The final entries were the most haunting. She mentioned proof, something she was keeping hidden. She wrote about secrets she had uncovered, people she couldn't trust, and her fear that she was running out of time. The very last entry, dated just 2 days before the accident, was short but chilling. They warned me again. H says if I don't hand it over, things will get worse. I don't know who to trust anymore. Even at home, I don't feel safe. If I don't make it through this, someone has to know. I slammed the diary shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. For 10 years I had lived with guilt, regret, and unanswered questions. And now, sitting in the silence of her bedroom, I held the truth in my hands. Anna hadn't died in an accident. She had been silenced. I sat on the floor of Anna's room for what felt like hours, the diary heavy in my lap. The words blurred together as my mind replayed them again and again. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. That sentence alone shattered everything I thought I knew about her death. For years I had been told a simple story. My sister took a curve too fast, lost control, and died instantly. End of story. Everyone, my parents, the police, her friends, treated it as fact. But now, in her own handwriting, Anna herself was contradicting that story. She had been afraid. She had been followed. She had been threatened. I felt sick. I tried to make sense of it logically. Could it have been the paranoia of a teenager? Could Anna have exaggerated something that wasn't really there? Maybe H was just a cruel ex-boyfriend, or maybe she was venting about ordinary high school drama. But the tone of her words didn't feel like exaggeration. They felt real, urgent, terrified. And there was something else. Anna hadn't been dramatic. She was the grounded one, the steady one. She didn't make mountains out of molehills. If she wrote these words, it was because she believed them. I flipped back through the diary, looking for patterns. H appeared often in the final months. Sometimes she wrote, "Saw H again today." Pretended not to notice, but he knows that I know. Other times it was more cryptic. He wants something. I don't know how much longer I can keep it hidden. Hidden. The word burned into me. What had she hidden? What could possibly have been so dangerous that it cost her life? I searched the room desperately, pulling open drawers, rifling through boxes, shaking out old clothes. Nothing. No photographs, no letters, no hidden envelopes. Finally, exhausted, I collapsed onto her bed. That's when I noticed it. On the underside of the wooden headboard, carved so faintly you'd miss it if you weren't looking, were 3 initials, HMC. I traced them with my fingers, my mind spinning. Was this connected? Or just some random doodle she'd etched into the wood? Suddenly, I remembered something. Years ago at the funeral, I had overheard two of Anna's friends whispering. One of them had said, "It doesn't make sense." She told me she was scared. She said someone was bothering her. The other friend had quickly shushed her, glancing nervously at my parents. At the time, I was too numb to process it. Now, those words echoed back with new clarity. I needed answers. The next day, I went to see my father. He was sitting in his study, as he always did, surrounded by paperwork and silence. When I placed the diary in front of him, his face went pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice sharp. "In Anna's room," I replied. "She wrote about someone following her. Someone threatening her. Dad. She knew. She knew her death wouldn't be an accident." He closed the diary abruptly and pushed it back toward me. "You shouldn't be reading this." I stared at him in disbelief. "Did you know?" His jaw tightened. He looked away, refusing to meet my eyes. "Sometimes grief makes us imagine things that aren't there. Your sister died in an accident, Sarah. That's the truth." But I could hear the crack in his voice, the one he couldn't quite hide. He knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough. I left his study shaken, clutching the diary to my chest like a lifeline. My father's refusal to talk only confirmed my suspicion. There was more to Anna's death than anyone had ever told me. That night, lying awake in bed, I whispered into the darkness, "Anna, I don't know what you were trying to tell me, but I promise you this, I'm going to find out." And for the first time in 10 years, I felt not just grief, but resolve. The next morning, I woke up with a single thought pounding in my head. I couldn't let this go. For 10 years, I had lived under the weight of silence, believing the version of events everyone fed me. But Anna's diary was proof that the truth had been buried, and if my father wasn't going to help me, then I would have to uncover it myself. I started with the people who had known her best, her friends. Digging through an old yearbook, I found their names: Kelly Harper, Melissa Grant, and Jason Cole. They had all been at the funeral. They had all been there when whispers of something darker first surfaced. I hadn't spoken to any of them in years, but social media made it easier than ever to track them down. Kelly was the first to respond. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near downtown. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. The bubbly teenager I remembered had been replaced by a woman with tired eyes and a nervous smile. We exchanged pleasantries, but I quickly cut to the point. I pulled out Anna's diary and slid it across the table. "Did you know about this?" I asked softly. Kelly's face drained of color as she flipped through the pages. When she reached one of the entries about H, her hand froze. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Sarah," she whispered, glancing around the cafe as if afraid someone might be listening. "Where did you find this?" "In Anna's room," I said. "She wrote about being followed, about being threatened." "Who was H?" Kelly shook her head quickly, closing the diary and pushing it back to me. "I can't. I shouldn't talk about this." My frustration bubbled up. "Please, Kelly. She was my sister. I've lived for 10 years believing she just lost control of her car." But she knew something. She wrote it down. And now I need answers. Kelly's eyes filled with tears. She leaned in close and whispered, "We all knew something was wrong. Anna told us she was scared. She said there was a man who kept showing up wherever she went, a man she called H. But every time we asked for details, she shut down. She said talking about it would only make it worse." "Did she ever say his full name?" I pressed. Kelly hesitated, then shook her head. "No. But she once mentioned initials. HMC, I think. I thought it was just some code between her and whoever he was." The initials, the same ones I had found carved into the headboard. My heart pounded. Kelly lowered her voice even further. "The night before the accident, she called me. She was crying. She said she had proof of something and that she didn't know who to trust. I told her to come over, but she said it was too late. that she had to deal with it on her own. What did she mean by proof? I asked. Kelly shook her head, her hands trembling. She wouldn't tell me, but she sounded terrified. And then, the next morning, she was gone. I sat back, my mind spinning. Anna had called for help. She had been on the edge of revealing everything. And then she was dead. Kelly grabbed my hand suddenly, her grip tight. Sarah, if you keep digging into this, be careful. Whoever H was, he had power, real power. And if Anna's death wasn't an accident, then you might be in danger too. Her warning sent a chill down my spine, but it also lit a fire inside me. For years I had wanted the truth, and now I was closer than ever. As I left the cafe, I pulled the diary from my bag and flipped through the final entries again. Anna's words were no longer just a cry for help. They were a map, pointing me toward something bigger, something hidden. And if following that map put me in danger, then so be it. Because I wasn't going to stop until I knew exactly who H was and what he had done to my sister. That night, I couldn't shake Kelly's warning from my mind. Her trembling voice, the way her eyes darted around the cafe. It wasn't just fear of the past. She was afraid of the present, as if H or the people connected to him were still out there, still watching. I tried to tell myself it was paranoia, that the danger had died with Anna. But deep down, I knew better. When I got home, I spread Anna's diary across my kitchen table again, surrounding it with the photocopies I had made of her entries. I scribbled notes on a yellow legal pad, HHMC proof, threats. The pattern was undeniable. Anna hadn't just been stalked, she had been silenced. Around midnight, exhausted, I pushed the papers aside and went to bed. But sleep didn't come. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the window made me jolt awake. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps outside, but when I pulled back the curtain, the street was empty. The next morning, I found something that made my blood run cold. On my front porch, propped neatly against the door, was an envelope, plain white, no return address. My name, Sarah, typed in block letters. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single piece of paper. 4 words, centered in bold black ink. Stop looking. Stay silent. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Someone knew. Someone was watching me, just like they had watched Anna. The air felt heavy around me, the morning sun suddenly too bright, too sharp. I staggered back inside and locked the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. For a moment, I considered calling the police, but what would I even say? That I found a threatening note? They'd ask who I thought sent it, and I'd have no answer. Worse, I'd have to hand over Anna's diary, and I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, I called Kelly. When she answered, her voice was tight. Sarah? They know, I whispered, clutching the note. Someone left a warning on my porch. Just like Anna wrote in her diary, there was a long silence. Then Kelly said quietly, I told you this was dangerous. You need to stop before it's too late. But stopping wasn't an option anymore. Later that day, as I left for the grocery store, I noticed a black sedan parked at the end of my street. At first I brushed it off, just another car. But when I came back an hour later, it was still there, engine idling softly. I walked past it, forcing myself not to look, but I could feel the weight of eyes on me, following my every move. That night, another note appeared. This time it wasn't slipped into an envelope. It was pinned directly to my front door with a knife. The paper flapped in the cold night air. The message was short, chilling. You were warned. The knife wasn't new. It was old, military style, with a worn handle. My stomach twisted as I pulled it free. It was too deliberate, too personal, like a calling card. Suddenly, Anna's last words in her diary echoed in my mind. If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Now I understood. Her stalker hadn't just threatened her. He had promised what would happen if she didn't give him what he wanted. And when she refused, he made good on his threat. And now, 10 years later, I was following the same trail. For the first time, Fear and rage coiled together in my chest. Whoever H was, he had taken my sister from me, and now he wanted to scare me into silence. But he had made a mistake. He thought fear would stop me. Instead, it gave me every reason to keep going. I didn't sleep that night. The knife sat on my kitchen counter like a cursed relic, its presence heavy, impossible to ignore. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Anna's handwriting in her diary, the words she had left behind as a warning. It felt as if her voice was reaching across the years, urging me not to turn back. By morning, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, but my resolve was sharper than ever. If they thought they could scare me into silence, they didn't understand me at all. I had already lost the most important person in my life. What more could they take from me? I needed more answers, and that meant talking to people who had been closest to Anna in her final months. Kelly had given me a glimpse of the truth, but she was too afraid to go further. That left Jason Cole, Anna's ex-boyfriend. Jason had always been a mystery to me. He was a year older than Anna, tall, with a quiet intensity that drew people in. At the funeral, he had kept his distance, speaking to no one, leaving before the service was even over. Over the years, I'd heard bits and pieces about him. He'd moved out of town, worked odd jobs, kept to himself. I tracked him down through social media and sent a message. To my surprise, he agreed to meet. We chose a small bar on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where no one asked questions. When I walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. Time had carved lines into his face, his hair now flecked with gray. But his eyes, the same deep, restless eyes I remembered from years ago, narrowed the moment he saw me. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, his voice low. "I wondered when you'd come." That threw me off. "What do you mean?" He gestured for me to sit. When the waitress left us alone, he leaned across the table. "I knew this day would come. I just didn't think it would take you 10 years. I pulled Anna's diary from my bag and set it between us. She wrote about someone following her. Someone she called H. Do you know who that is?" Jason's jaw tightened. His hand hovered over the diary but didn't touch it, as if it burned just to look at it. "I told her to stop," he said finally. "I begged her to leave it alone." "Leave what alone?" I pressed. He shook his head, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Hale. That was his name. Charles Hale. Everyone called him H. He wasn't just some creep. He was dangerous, powerful. He had connections in places you wouldn't believe." The name sent a chill down my spine. Hale. It fit. The initials HMC suddenly made sense. Charles was his middle name. Jason rubbed his face with both hands as though trying to wipe away memories. Anna found out something she wasn't supposed to. Documents, I think. Proof of deals Hale was involved in. She wouldn't tell me the details, said it was safer if I didn't know. But I knew enough to be afraid. She thought if she held on to the evidence, she could use it as protection. She didn't realize that just knowing was enough to get her killed. My stomach twisted. "And the accident?" Jason's eyes met mine, and in them I saw a decade of guilt. "It wasn't an accident. That road, Hale's men used it. They knew her routine." She didn't stand a chance. I felt the blood drain from my face. "Why didn't you say anything back then? Why didn't you go to the police?" His laugh was bitter. "The police?" Half of them were in Hale's pocket. If I had spoken up, I'd have been next. You don't fight men like him, Sarah. You survive them. The waitress dropped off our drinks, breaking the tension for a moment. Jason didn't touch his. He leaned closer, his voice urgent. "If you're smart, you'll walk away now. Burn that diary. Forget the name Hale. Because if his people are still watching, and I promise you they are, they won't hesitate to do to you what they did to Anna." I clenched my fists beneath the table. They already left a note. They already left a knife. Jason's eyes widened. Then it's already too late. You're on their radar. Silence settled between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, Jason slid a folded piece of paper across the table. This is the address of someone who used to work for Hale. He might still know something if he's alive. But Sarah, be careful. Once you step through this door, there's no going back. I tucked the paper into my bag, my pulse hammering. I didn't know what I would find at that address, but one thing was certain. I was closer than ever to the truth. The piece of paper Jason had slipped across the table felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my bag. I couldn't stop touching it, unfolding and refolding it, my fingers tracing the faded ink of the name and address he had scribbled down. Harold McConnell, 52 Eastbrook Lane. Worked for Hale, Jason had said. Might still know something. The address was on the edge of town, in a neighborhood I barely remembered. As I drove there, the streets grew narrower, the houses older, most of them with peeling paint and rusted mailboxes. It was the kind of place where people disappeared into their own lives, where neighbors didn't ask questions. Number 52 was a sagging two-story house with boarded-up windows and an overgrown yard. A chain-link fence leaned precariously against the sidewalk, the gate half open. My instinct screamed at me to turn around, but my curiosity, and Anna's voice echoing in my head, kept me moving forward. I knocked. At first there was no answer. I was about to leave when I heard the sound of shuffling inside, followed by the squeak of a lock. The door opened a crack, and one bloodshot eye peered out. "What do you want?" the man rasped. "I'm looking for Harold McConnell," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The door opened wider. The man standing there was frail, hunched, his skin weathered like leather. His clothes hung loose on him, and his hands shook as he gripped the doorframe. "That depends on who's asking," he muttered. "My name is Sarah Mitchell." My sister, Anna Mitchell, knew Charles Hale. I think you did too. The name Hale seemed to electrify him. His eyes sharpened, and he quickly pulled me inside, slamming the door shut behind me. "You shouldn't be here," Harold hissed, pacing the small, cluttered living room. "You don't say that name out loud." "Not here, not anywhere." I clutched Anna's diary in my hands. She wrote about him. She was scared of him. And then she died. Everyone told me it was an accident, but I don't believe it anymore. Harold stopped pacing. For a long moment, he just stared at me, his lips trembling. Then he sank into a worn armchair, his whole body collapsing like a deflated balloon. "Your sister was brave," he said finally. "Braver than anyone gave her credit for. But bravery doesn't keep you alive when you're dealing with men like Hale." I leaned forward. "Tell me, please. What was Hale? Who was he really?" Harold let out a bitter laugh. "Who was he? He was the man who ran this town from the shadows. Drugs, money laundering, payoffs to cops and judges, you name it. And he was smart. And he was... never left a paper trail, always had someone else's hands dirty while his stayed clean." My stomach turned. And Anna? How did she get involved? "She stumbled onto something she wasn't supposed to," Harold said, rubbing his temples. "She found records, ledgers that tied Hale to a string of disappearances. Workers who questioned him, men who tried to leave, even one cop who refused a bribe. She had proof, real proof, and she thought she could use it to expose him." The room seemed to tilt around me. "She was only 17, I whispered. Harold's eyes were heavy with sorrow. 17 or 70, it didn't matter. She saw what she wasn't supposed to, and once that happened, she was marked." I opened the diary to the final entries and handed it to him. His hands shook as he read the words, his eyes clouding with recognition. "Yeah," he muttered. "That's Hale, all right. Hand it over or else." That's how he worked. Always gave you a choice, but it wasn't a real one. Tears burned my eyes. "So he killed her." "He killed my sister," Harold looked up sharply. "Not Hale himself. He never got his hands dirty, but his men, they'd have run her off the road, no question. And if they left it looking like an accident, that was just their way of tying it off neat." The words hit me like a physical blow. For years I had clung to the idea that Anna's death was fate. Now I knew it was murder. I stood, my legs trembling. "Then help me." Give me names. Give me something I can take to the police, to the press, anything. Harold shook his head violently. No, don't you get it? You think you're the first person to try? Hale's been dead for years, but his people aren't. They're still out there, keeping his secrets. If they know you've got that diary, you're already in danger. I thought of the knife pinned to my door, the black sedan parked down my street. He was right. They already knew. Harold's voice softened, his eyes pleading. Leave it alone, Sarah. Forget Anna. Live your life. That's what she would want. I clutched the diary tighter, my jaw set. No, that's what you want. But what Anna wanted, what she died for, was the truth. And I'm not going to stop until I find it. For a moment, silence hung between us. Then Harold leaned forward, his voice a harsh whisper. Then you'd better be ready. Because once you start pulling at the threads of Hale's web, there's no escape. Either you burn with it, or you burn it down. Leaving Harold's house, I felt like my whole body was vibrating. His words echoed in my ears. Either you burn with it, or you burn it down. The air outside felt heavier, colder, as if the shadows themselves were listening. I clutched Anna's diary to my chest like it was the only thing keeping me alive. The street was empty, but the moment I slid into my car, I felt it, the unmistakable sense of being watched. I started the engine and glanced in the rearview mirror. At the far end of the block, a dark sedan idled, the same one I'd seen before. I pulled away slowly, my hands slick on the steering wheel. The sedan followed, keeping 2 cars' distance. My chest tightened. I turned right. So did they. I turned left. They did too. By the time I reached the highway, panic clawed at me. I pressed harder on the gas, weaving through traffic. The sedan kept pace, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the driver. Finally, in desperation, I veered into a crowded shopping center and parked between 2 trucks. My heart pounded as I waited, barely breathing. After a few minutes, the sedan cruised by, unable to follow without drawing attention. I stayed hidden until it was gone, but I knew this was no coincidence. They weren't just watching anymore, they were hunting. That night, when I finally made it home, I found my front door slightly ajar. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. I pushed it open slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The living room was dark, but it was wrong. Too still, too quiet. I flicked on the light and froze. The place had been ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, cushions slashed open. They had been looking for something. I sprinted to the bedroom. The shoebox where I had hidden the diary copies was gone. The lockbox under my bed, empty. The only reason I still had the diary itself was because I'd carried it with me to Harold's. On the wall above my bed, scrawled in black spray paint, was a single chilling message. You can't hide forever. My knees buckled. They had been inside my home. They had touched my things, walked through my private spaces. I felt exposed, stripped bare. I dialed Jason in a frenzy. When he answered, his voice was sharp with alarm. Sarah? What happened? They broke in, I gasped. They took everything but the diary. They know I've been digging, Jason cursed under his breath. I told you, they won't stop. Hale might be gone, but his network is still alive, and now you're their target. Then what do? I whispered, tears burning in my eyes. Jason hesitated. You fight back. But you don't do it alone. There are people who've been waiting years for someone like you, for proof. You need to take this higher. Federal level. Press anyone who can't be bought. I clutched the diary tighter, my knuckles white. Anna trusted me with this, even if she didn't mean to. If I stop now, her death will stay a lie. And I can't let that happen. Jason's voice softened. Then you'd better be ready, Sarah. Because they'll come harder now. They'll want to finish what they started with your sister. After we hung up, I sat in the wreckage of my bedroom, staring at the spray-painted threat. My fear was real, pounding through every nerve in my body. But beneath it, a fire burned hotter than ever. They had silenced Anna. They had tried to silence me. But all they had done was prove I was right. And if they wanted me gone, they'd have to face the truth I was about to unleash. I didn't sleep the entire night. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the window made me think they were back, that at any moment the door would burst open and I'd be dragged away just like Anna. By dawn, I sat at the kitchen table, the diary open in front of me, its pages stained with tears and smeared ink from my trembling hands. The spray-painted threat on my wall replayed in my mind like a mantra. You can't hide forever. They were right. I couldn't hide. But I also couldn't keep running in circles, chasing whispers in the dark. If I wanted to survive, and if I wanted Anna's story to finally be told, I needed to put this in the hands of people who could fight back. Jason's words from the night before came back to me. You need to take this higher. Federal level. Press. Anyone who can't be bought, I thought about going straight to the police. But Harold's warning rang louder than ever. Half of them had been in Hale's pocket. Even now, decades later, who knew how deep his network still ran? No, I needed someone untouchable. Someone with nothing to lose. That's when I remembered Rachel Turner. She wasn't just any journalist. She was the investigative reporter. I had followed her work for years. Articles that had brought down corrupt city officials, exposed cover-ups in law enforcement, even toppled a corporate giant once thought untouchable. If anyone could handle the truth of Anna's diary, it was Rachel. I found her email, hesitated for only a moment, then typed, My name is Sarah Mitchell. My sister Anna died in a car accident 10 years ago. I have proof it wasn't an accident. She was silenced because she uncovered evidence against a man named Charles Hale. I have her diary. Please meet me. This story is bigger than me, and I need your help. I hit send before fear could stop me. Rachel's reply came less than an hour later. Bring the diary. Meet me at Union Cafe, 2 p.m. today. Don't tell anyone. And Sarah, be careful. The cafe was bustling when I arrived, the smell of roasted coffee and the clatter of dishes filling the air. I spotted her immediately. Rachel looked exactly as I'd imagined, sharp, confident, her dark hair pulled back, eyes that scanned the room like a hawk. When I sat across from her, she leaned in, lowering her voice. You have no idea how many people have tried to bury Hale's name, she said. But you're the first who's come forward with something tangible. Let me see it. My hands shook as I slid the diary across the table. Rachel opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. With each entry, her expression darkened. By the time she reached the final words Anna had written, If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident. Her jaw was tight with anger. This is dynamite, she whispered. But it's also a death sentence if you're not careful. I know, I said softly. They've already threatened me. Broke into my house, took copies I made, left a knife in my door. Rachel's eyes locked on mine. Then you don't have time. We need to move fast. I'll have my team cross-reference these entries with old police reports, financial records, missing persons cases. If what your sister uncovered connects to Hale's network, we'll expose it piece by piece. For the first time in years, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. But then Rachel said something that chilled me. Sarah, you have to understand. Once this goes public, your life won't go back to normal. Hale's people, whoever's left, they won't just sit quietly while I publish this. They'll try to discredit you, destroy you, maybe even finish what they started with Anna. Are you ready for that? Her words settled over me like a heavy weight. My life as I knew it, my job, my friends, even the fragile relationship I still had with my father, could crumble the moment Rachel's article hit the press. But when I thought of Anna, of the 10 years I'd lived believing a lie, I knew I didn't have a choice. Yes, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready. If they want to come for me, let them. But they won't silence us both. Rachel gave a small nod, determination flashing in her eyes. Then let's burn them down. We parted ways cautiously, both of us checking the street before stepping outside. The same black sedan was parked across from the cafe, its engine idling. Rachel saw it too. She squeezed my hand. They're watching. But don't worry, Sarah. If they think they can intimidate me, they picked the wrong journalist. I watched her disappear into the crowd, the diary tucked securely in her bag. For the first time since Anna's death, the burden didn't feel like mine alone. I had an ally, someone who could shine a light into the darkness that had haunted me for a decade. But as I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that the game had changed. They knew I wasn't alone anymore, and that meant they would be more desperate, more dangerous. I buckled my seatbelt, glanced into the mirror, and whispered to myself, "This isn't just about Anna anymore. It's about all of us." And in that moment, I understood. The fight for the truth had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, encrypted emails, and tense meetings in quiet corners of cafes where Rachel assured me it was safe to talk. Her team of researchers had jumped on Anna's diary with a ferocity that stunned me. They traced dates, cross-referenced names, pulled old police reports, and even filed requests for declassified documents. And the deeper they dug, the uglier it got. Anna hadn't been imagining things. The names in her diary matched names in missing persons cases, men who had vanished without explanation, their families silenced by thin reports and dead-end investigations. Money trails, once invisible, began to take shape when Rachel's team mapped them across decades. Funds funneled through shell companies, construction contracts awarded to ghosts, payouts that lined the pockets of men who had smiled in public while pulling strings in private. Rachel called me one night, her voice taut with excitement. "Sarah, your sister had stumbled onto a network that didn't die with Hale. It's still alive, just quieter, better hidden. And you're not going to believe this, but some of the same companies she mentioned are still active today, tied to politicians and businessmen who pretend they've got clean hands." I felt a wave of nausea. Anna hadn't just been a frightened teenager scribbling in a diary. She had uncovered the roots of a machine that still had teeth, and they had killed her for it. But the more Rachel uncovered, the louder the pushback became. Anonymous emails filled my inbox. "Stop feeding lies to the press. You're dragging your sister's name through the mud." Then came the phone calls, blocked numbers, distorted voices, promising that if Rachel didn't back off, I would be the one in the obituary next. One evening, I returned home to find my apartment door ajar again. This time, nothing was stolen. Instead, on the kitchen table sat a single object, one of Anna's photographs, the frame shattered, her smiling face slashed with a knife. I collapsed against the counter, sobbing, fear and rage twisting inside me. They weren't just warning me anymore. They were desecrating her memory. Rachel urged me to move into protective housing, but I refused. "If I run, they win," I told her, my voice raw. That's what they did to Anna. They scared her, cornered her, and then silenced her. I won't give them that satisfaction. Still, I agreed to carry a burner phone and keep constant contact with her team. The breaking point came a week later. Rachel called, her tone urgent. "Sarah, we just confirmed something big. One of Hale's old associates, Harold McConnell, your contact. He's missing. His neighbors say 2 men showed up last night and no one's seen him since. His house is locked up, but the inside is trashed." The blood drained from my face. I had just been in Harold's house. He had looked me in the eye and warned me to walk away. Now he was gone. "Do you think?" My voice cracked. "Yes," Rachel interrupted grimly. "They tied off another loose end." Terror gripped me. Harold had been a frail old man, no threat to anyone. If they were willing to erase him, what chance did I have? That night, I couldn't stay still. I paced the apartment, every shadow threatening, every sound outside a warning. Around midnight, headlights washed across my window. A car idled outside for several minutes before finally driving off. My hands shook so badly I dropped a glass of water, the shards scattering across the floor. I realized then that the line between me and Anna had blurred completely. I was living her final days, the fear, the stalking, the sense that every step I took might be my last. The next morning, Rachel called again. Her voice was both excited and worried. "We're going to publish, Sarah. Tomorrow. I don't care who threatens us anymore. We've got enough evidence to rip this open. But you need to be careful. Once the story goes live, you'll be their #1 target. Are you ready for that?" I thought of Anna, her laughter, her kindness, the way she had promised to take me shopping that weekend. I thought of the diary, her desperate words, the fear in every line. I took a deep breath, my chest trembling. Yes, I'm ready. Whatever they do to me, it won't erase the truth. Rachel was silent for a moment, then whispered, "You're braver than you know." That night, as I lay awake, I couldn't shake one final thought. Anna had been silenced before she could expose them. Now it was my turn to finish what she started. But in the back of my mind, a terrifying question gnawed at me. Would I live to see the truth come out? The morning Rachel's article was set to publish, I woke before dawn. The sky outside was gray, heavy with clouds, as if the world itself was holding its breath. I sat at the kitchen table, Anna's diary open in front of me, my hands pressed flat against its fragile pages. For years, this little book had been a whisper in the dark, a secret too dangerous to tell. In a few hours, it would become a megaphone loud enough for the whole country to hear. At 9 a.m., Rachel called. Her voice was tight but charged with adrenaline. "It's live, Sarah." "The story's out." I opened my laptop and typed in the news site's address. And there it was. The Legacy of Charles Hale. Secrets, cover-ups, and a murder that wasn't an accident. Anna's name was there too, not as a footnote in some dusty police report, but as the headline victim whose death had been buried under lies. The article laid everything bare: her diary entries, the missing persons tied to Hale, the shell companies, the trail of corruption that stretched from his time to the present day. Rachel's team had even managed to tie several current city officials to Hale's old network. My chest ached as I read. Tears blurred my vision. For the first time in a decade, Anna's voice wasn't just mine to hear. The world could finally listen. But the victory was short-lived. By noon, my phone was flooded. Texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years, calls from unknown numbers, even reporters banging on my door. Some messages were supportive, thanking me for my courage. Others were filled with venom. "Liar. You're disgracing your sister's memory. You don't know what you're messing with." At 2 p.m., Rachel called again, her voice more urgent this time. "They're panicking, Sarah. We've already had 3 cease and desist letters, threats of lawsuits, even warnings from inside the police department to back off. That only proves we hit the right nerve. But you need to get somewhere safe." Tonight, before I could respond, there was a loud thud outside my apartment. My heart froze. I peeked through the blinds and saw 2 men in dark jackets, standing by the black sedan that had haunted me for weeks. One of them looked up directly at my window, his expression cold, deliberate. "They're here," I whispered into the phone. Rachel's voice sharpened. "Don't open the door. I'll send someone. Do not be alone tonight." I backed away from the window, clutching the diary. My whole body trembled. The walls felt like they were closing in, the air too thick to breathe. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was rooted in place by fear. Then, suddenly, the sound of sirens pierced the air. The men outside scattered, the sedan screeching as it tore down the street. I collapsed to the floor, shaking with relief and terror. Minutes later, Rachel's team arrived with federal agents. The next days were chaos. The story exploded nationwide. Politicians scrambled to distance themselves from Hale's legacy, some resigning within hours. Federal investigations were launched. The diary was entered into evidence, authenticated by handwriting experts, cross-checked against old case files. For the first time, people were saying Anna's name not as a forgotten tragedy, but as a symbol of truth long buried. And yet, for me, the victory was complicated. I was moved into temporary protection housing, forced to live with constant surveillance. The threats didn't stop, they just changed form. Online campaigns painted me as unstable, accusing me of fabricating the diary. A smear piece appeared in a rival paper, claiming Anna had been a troubled teen seeking attention. But every attempt to erase her only made me fight harder. On the 1-year anniversary of the article, I stood at Anna's grave. The headstone was simple, her name etched in stone, the date of her birth and death. But now, fresh flowers covered it, dozens of them, left by strangers who had read her story and wanted to honor her. I knelt, placing my hand against the cool stone. "They tried to silence you, Anna," I whispered, "but they failed. You're louder now than you ever were, and I promise, as long as I'm alive, no one will bury your truth again." For a moment, a sense of peace washed over me, something I hadn't felt in 10 years. But beneath it lingered the shadow of fear. Hale's network might be wounded, but it wasn't gone. Men like him never truly disappeared. They adapted, hid, waited for their chance. As I rose to leave, I felt eyes on me from across the cemetery. A man stood by the gates watching. When I met his gaze, he turned and walked away without a word. Even now, even after the truth was out, I understood. The danger wasn't over. It might never be over, but I also understood something else. I wasn't the scared 15-year-old girl anymore, waiting for answers that never came. I was the woman who had carried Anna's voice into the world, and no matter what they tried to do to me, that voice would never be silenced again.